During the time when his life was turned upside down, Charles was just 6 years old. As a result of a sickness, his mother, who was the only person who had ever loved him, had passed away, leaving him to live alone in an institution that was harsh and unkind. As soon as he found out that Charles was pregnant, the guy disappeared, leaving Charles' mother to struggle on her own. He never got the opportunity to meet his father. As of this moment, even she had vanished. I had a terrible experience in the orphanage. Every day, he was subjected to terrible and unrelenting suffering at the hands of the other youngsters. My dear Charles, your mother has passed away. She is not going to return at any time. Although tears were beginning to fill up in his eyes, they would sneer and laugh. She left you because she didn't want you. Every statement was like a dagger that was being twisted in his heart. He implored the people who were responsible for her care to allow him visit her burial, but they consistently refused to do so. However, one day, for reasons that are unclear, they finally gave in. The air was dense with the aroma of moist dirt and withered flowers, contributing to the silence that pervaded the cemetery. In front of his mother's grave, Charles knelt down on his knees, pushing his little hands into the icy stone as if he could really reach out and touch her. "Mama, please." His speech was hardly audible above a whisper. "This is something I can no longer do. Include me on your journey. It would be a terrible thing for me to be here without you." He was sobbing so hard that his small body was trembling and tears were streaming down his cheeks. It seemed as if he was attempting to secure himself to her by clinging to the grass underneath him, and he refused to let go of it. It was hours before, as the sky became darker. Despite the fact that the staff at the orphanage called for him, he did not move. Following that, it took place. While the trees in the graveyard remained still, a gust of wind howled through the area. The temperature plummeted precipitously, to the point that Charles' breath became frosted in the air. What seemed to be a faint illumination emanating from the tomb was really pulsating like a pulse. A gasp was heard from the personnel of the orphanage, and they stumbled back in fear. It was a hand that was pale and transparent, coming from the ground, and Charles felt it before he saw it as it appeared. The grasp that it had on his wrist was not one of icy coldness, but rather one of warmness. "My son," there was no one else's voice. "It is his mother's." As a result, the earth shook. Screams came from the personnel. On the other hand, Charles did not retreat. As he leaned into the contact, the tears that were beginning to fall were ones of relief. "Mama, you came back for me." Her body shimmered like moonlight on water as it emerged from the grave, and the ethereal figure of his mother emerged from the coffin. A soft touch was applied by her as she cupped his face. "I never abandoned you, my dearest love. Yet you are required to live. It is not yet too late for you." A forceful shake of the head was given by Charles. "No, no. I would want to remain in your company." She gave a despondent grin. "It is not yet. In spite of everything, I will never leave your side. You are going to witness it very soon." She kissed him on the forehead and then disappeared after uttering those mysterious words. Once again, the cemetery lapsed into a state of silence. The employees of the orphanage remained still, their horror causing their cheeks to become white. On the other hand, Charles experienced, for the first time in a very long time, a sense of tranquility. Upon their return to the orphanage, the bullies did not continue to harass him as they had done before. Neither of them could, mainly due to the fact that from that day forward, the temperature will decrease any time they make an attempt. There would be a growth in shadows, and they would get a glimpse of her, observing on the periphery of their field of view. Still, Charles went to pay his respects at the tomb, but at this point, he did not weep. he wore a grin. The reason being that he was aware that his mother was listening. She would respond at some point in the future. Yes, in fact, Charles was no longer the same shattered youngster following the meeting at the cemetery, which occurred some weeks after the event. Instead of approaching him, the other orphans avoided him and whispered behind his back. A youngster who spoke with the dead was referred to as ghost-touched by those who knew him. Even those who were responsible for his care kept a wary watch on him and crossed their fingers whenever he passed by. But Charles was unconcerned about it, due to the fact that he was no longer alone himself. The dreams were the beginning of it all. In the darkness, Charles would see his mother standing at the foot of his bed, her ethereal figure shimmering faintly. This was something that Charles saw every night. Despite the fact that she never talked, her presence was sufficient. It was then that she did it, at long last, one evening. There are other people that are similar, like me, Charles. You are need to assist them. It was with a gulp that he awoke, his heart racing rapidly. It was really cold in the room. One word was written in ice on the wall that was directly across from his bed. Open your ears. It was a voice that Charles heard the next day as he was doing his duties. The voice was so quiet that it might have been the wind. Behind the old oak, he evaded the other people and made his way toward the enormous tree that was located on the outside of the orphanage grounds. He was curious about what was going on. There was a little locket that had corroded and was partially buried in the ground around it. When he finally managed to pry it open, an image of a young girl that had started to fade was staring back at him. During that night, he had dreams about her. She said, "My name was Emily," as she introduced herself. "They buried me at this location. Everyone forgets about me, with the exception of you." Though he had left the locket beneath his pillow, Charles was startled, awake, and discovered that he was holding it securely in his palm. Charles had always been a source of resentment for Mr. Grayson, the strict individual who served as the headmaster of the orphanage. The event that took place at the cemetery, however, caused his animosity to transform into something more sinister, terror. During the course of one evening, Charles found himself listening in on him as he whispered something to another member of the staff. The kid in question is not natural. His mother's passing was not typical in any way. And at this point, he is noticing stuff. "What exactly do you mean?" the other person inquired. When Mr. Grayson spoke, his voice became more subdued. There was more to her illness than that. However, there were rumors regarding the extent of her capabilities. A chill went through Charles's veins. On that particular evening, his mother made another appearance. However, this time she was not single. There were a dozen gloomy individuals standing behind her, and their eyes turned to him with empty expressions. "They were murdered, Charles," his mother was heard to say, "just like me." Charles started digging, not just in the ground, but also in the documents that had been neglected by the orphanage. He had nothing except the timidity of a kid. What he discovered was a nightmare that no one had ever had the courage to discuss. Once upon a time, the property that later became the location of the orphanage was used as a place to house unwanted children. These were children who had peculiar powers and children who saw things that others were unable to see. With each passing moment, each and every one of them vanished. It had been his mother who had been one of them. "Is that you, Mr. Grayson?" It wasn't enough for him to be a caregiver. As a murderer, he died. The next stormy night, Charles met Mr. Grayson in his office at his place of business. The guy first laughed, but then Charles put the locket on his desk, which caused him to change his mind. Emily says hello. Suddenly, the room was filled with a chilling blackness. Window squeaks might be heard. The walls moaned in protest, and after that, they arrived. Shadows began to form as they moved out from the edges of the room and began to take shape. Children with emaciated cheeks and empty eyes walked up in dozens. Their faces were haggard. The scream came from Mr. Grayson. Charles, meanwhile, was just observing. He came to the realization that justice did not necessarily originate from those who were still alive. Mr. Grayson was discovered in his office the next morning, his body as rigid as stone and his face set in a state of frozen dread. A heart attack was the diagnosis that the physicians gave. The orphans, however, were aware of the reality. Charles left the orphanage not long after that, and he was eventually adopted by a kind old couple who did not show any fear when he talked to the void. You may also see him if you pass by the cemetery at midnight. He would be sitting beside the grave of his mother, surrounded by shadows that were flickering. I am listening, holding out for safeguarding, because the dead are incapable of forgetting. Additionally, Charles does not do so.